He-Man?
While He-Man, Skeletor, and Teela are familiar names to all of us who have grown up with good old television cartoons, as opposed to modern-day streaming sites, very few Masters of the Universe fans know that their story actually started out as comics, with Mattel releasing a toy line and DC Comics writing them into a Superman comic. These characters have shaped pop culture long before they made their way to our television screens, through comic appearances, crossover universes, and collaborations with other media franchises. From Batman to Superman and Thundercats, He-Man has canonically collaborated with some truly shocking names. So, by the power of Grayskull, let's dive right into it as I tell you all about the wildest He-Man crossovers you never knew were canon. The first He-Man comic ever was a Superman crossover. To kick it off, DC Comics started the trend of He-Man crossovers with their 1982 release Superman and the Masters of the Universe. The cover art involves Superman lunging at He-Man against a backdrop that hints at Skeletor gaining control over the Man of Steel, and the story soon reveals that Kal-El, or Superman, had succumbed to Skeletor's magical bonds that kept draining the life force out of him. While He-Man raises his giant sword and threatens Skeletor to release this traveler from his chains, the story soon breaks down the details as Man-at-Arms trains with Prince Adam in the royal city of Eternia. At this point, Prince Adam's alter ego remains under wraps as he fools around with Man-at-Arms and excels at his training, while Teela wanders into the room and passes a comment on his lack of wit and sense of responsibility. We also learn that she is none other than Man-at-Arms' daughter, and while Prince Adam advises her against making ill-intended comments toward the Prince of the Realm, the story takes us far away from Eternia, all the way to Earth, where Clark Kent reveals his Superman identity to us readers. With this, a comic panel hints at these two worlds with infinite time between them, soon coming together as the scene once again shifts to Prince Adam as he pets Cringer, only for their peaceful interaction to be interrupted by Crusher. However, their face-off does not last for too long as Prince Adam finds himself summoned to the Cavern of Power, where the mighty sorceress transforms him into He-Man and Cringer into Battle Cat simultaneously. While many fans believe He-Man's origins were revealed in a self-titled comic or animated series, it was actually this Superman crossover that linked his identities and laid the foundation for his dual personas. As the sorceress continues to talk, we learn that the demonic Skeletor had once again returned to spread chaos in Eternia. However, his wrongdoings are not just restricted to Eternia this time around, and as he strikes Castle Grayskull with all his might, he unleashes an attack so terrible that its effects are felt all the way until Earth. Now, Superman immediately notices these terrible storm clouds and rushes to investigate them, only to be sucked into a cloudy portal that brings him to Eternia. As he gets closer, he realizes that his powers are weakening by the moment, and as he questions the presence of kryptonite, we soon learn that it was actually Skeletor's magic that had tinkered with his capabilities. While Skeletor rejoices in the presence of an agent to do battle with him, the crossover turns into a reality as Superman lands in Eternia's magical land, a world where reality was not what he had come to expect. In no time, Skeletor raises his sword to draw first blood, while Superman wonders who this skull-faced clown with the overgrown pocket knife might be. In this way, the comic truly captures the absurdities of Masters of the Universe lore through Superman's eyes, but Skeletor turns out to be more than a strange villain. In no time, he defeats Superman and sends him crashing through the landscape, while He-Man finally takes note of this otherworldly superhero and senses his distress. He rushes to his rescue, and the two superheroes soon get acquainted with one another as He-Man reveals that he had heard of Earth as well as Superman. While he keeps his next thought to himself, we readers learn that he knew this because his own mother was a lost traveler from Earth. However, he decides to keep her identity as well as his true nature as Prince Adam a secret, as the two of them march forward to face Skeletor. Unfortunately, it is at this moment that Skeletor uses his magic to pit these two heroes against one another, and the two tragic heroes clash against one another, with an orphaned Kryptonian with mighty capabilities on one side and Eternia's prince on the other. This does turn out to be a tough clash, even if Superman seems to be aware of the damage he is doing. He reveals that he feels rather helpless against Skeletor's magic, and eventually comes up with a plan to distract Skeletor for long enough to break free from his control. Now, Skeletor is not one to linger around, after admitting failure, and he disappears into thin air to plot his next schemes, while Superman and He-Man share a moment of friendship before the Man of Steel rushes to return to Earth through a small time-space warp. Before he leaves, he asks He-Man to call upon him in case of any help, and this crossover comic wraps up with He-Man bidding him farewell until the next time they meet. Released even ahead of the Masters of the Universe animated show, this comic lays the foundation for He-Man's core canon, which came as a shock to me, as it all takes place within Superman comics. However, this is just the beauty of digging through the interconnected webs of fiction, and as I flipped through the pages, I was so sucked into the way it depicts Eternia and the escapades of the He-Man crew that I almost even forgot that it was a crossover. The comic strategically places Superman into the background and brings him to the forefront only after laying down enough of a foundation for the mystical land of Eternia and all the interesting personalities that are home to it. He-Man was secretly a Marvel Comics character for 2 years. While most fans could never have imagined that He-Man was ever associated with Marvel Comics, he was actually part of a full-fledged comic run that ran from 1986 to 1988 under their children-focused Star Comics banner. Under this, the Masters of the Universe comics ran for about 13 issues and introduced many iconic toy line characters, such as the Meteorians and Rock People, in addition to solidifying He-Man's position as a Marvel Comics character. The comic debuted with The Coming of Hordak, an introductory issue that began with Skeletor scrambling around to prevent Hordak's return. As he realizes that this mighty evil being grows stronger and is bound to make a comeback, he then decides to attain the secrets of Castle Grayskull, so he has all the power he needs to keep Hordak at bay. Flaunting his newly attained terror claws of Alaka, Skeletor then plots his next moves, while the Sorceress of Grayskull senses the impending doom and transforms into the Falcon, Zor, to find He-Man. In the meantime, we see Prince Adam and Teela sparring away as Man-at-Arms, Cringer, and Orko watch them from afar, as Teela pretty much emerges victorious. However, Orko disrupts their fair fight by summoning something to cushion Prince Adam's fall, only to accidentally summon ice instead of something nice. As they joke around about him falling into a tub of ice cubes, Prince Adam soon spots the sorceress and figures out that there might be some trouble at Castle Grayskull. He immediately excuses himself from the fight and utters the iconic chant, "By the power of Grayskull," that transforms him into He-Man. With Cringer turning into Battlecat next to him, the iconic duo rushes to Grayskull to find that Skeletor has used his newfound weapon to dig a tunnel through the castle. Moreover, he had even captured Zor with his magic, and as He-Man attempts to free the sorceress-turned-Falcon, Skeletor warns him against interfering as it might just end with them accidentally unleashing Hordak. Unfortunately, he pretty much jinxes himself by spelling out this possibility, and as Orko uses a mistaken spell to free Zor, he even ends up weakening the magic that kept Hordak away. In no time, the demonic monster appears with some key members of his evil horde, including Grizzlor, Mantenna, Leech, and Modulok. As Skeletor and Hordak end up fighting each other, He-Man even jumps in to save Skeletor, a move that angers Hordak to the extent that he ends up sending He-Man's crew to his dimension to keep them at bay. However, Orko finally gets his spells right and helps them return to Eternia, while Teela and Man-at-Arms also arrive at Grayskull and witness Skeletor and Hordak's iconic battle. Eventually, He-Man subdues Hordak and sends him back to his dimension amidst threats of return and revenge, while a rather ungrateful Skeletor declares that he would rather lose than accept He-Man's help. However, a kind-hearted He-Man is content with the fact that they saved the day, even if Skeletor promises to destroy them as the issue comes to an end. In this way, Marvel Comics first ushered us into the Masters of the Universe world by jumping right into the action and treating Eternia as a continuing world rather than a new setting. This issue also featured iconic settings such as the Royal Palace, Snake Mountain, and Castle Grayskull, and while the art style is rather colorful, the narration captures the mystical nature of the land of Eternia. Admittedly, the dialogues have a touch of simplicity and humor to them, but again, this makes sense when you consider that Marvel had launched this comic with children readers in mind. Now, the comic does jump directly into the story without setting much context or revisiting the origin story, thereby giving Marvel enough space to pack dramatic, recurring storylines and multi-issue long story arcs into one 13-issue long book. While the story begins by introducing Skeletor and the mythical Hordak, it paints Hordak as a conqueror with extra-dimensional technology and resources at his side. This does add an interesting edge to a character who was defined by sending his minions Eternians to attack Castle Grayskull again and again. And as the remaining issues dig deeper into Masters of the Universe mythology, it is pretty clear how Marvel enhances the pre-existing story in its own way. The pre-characters have more flair while also giving Mattel enough space to expand this universe and shed the spotlight on newer beings such as Cyclone and Rio Blast. This comic also introduces an artifact known as the Secret Files of Skrolos, a canonical record of Eternians that gives us a peek into these new characters' origins, loyalties, and lore. As the comic progresses, Hordak's increasing power hints at a universe beyond what appears on page, thereby tying the comic to a greater multi-universe filled with conflicts that play out in the background. The pages are filled with bustling action sequences and superhero-style battles that scream Marvel Comics in the best way possible. With this comic, it feels like a part of something bigger, something more dynamic, and one of the issue's art even has a Marvel's anniversary cover gimmick with a border art that includes many iconic Marvel heroes. Even if this quietly signals that He-Man shares space with the likes of X-Men and Spider-Man, Marvel goes above and beyond to subtly include the comic in the larger universe, even if there are no direct crossovers that suggest this. The overall aesthetic placed Eternia under Marvel's umbrella, even leading fans to consider He-Man a Marvel character. As things go further, things take a dark turn as He-Man finds himself in a dystopian, futuristic Eternia ruled by Skeletor. This scene fits right into Marvel's formula of placing superheroes in situations where they make last-ditch efforts to change the course of the villain's long-term plans. And the comic's last issue begins with He-Man blaming himself for everything that had gone wrong. We learn that his teacher and mentor, Man-at-Arms, was dead, while his daughter and his close friend, Teela, had turned into a cold, emotionally hardened sorceress who was merely a shell of his former optimistic self. On the other hand, his parents had been held captive in Skeletor's dungeons for about 30 years, while Teela's mother had sacrificed herself to give He-Man a chance to escape these dungeons. With nothing left to lose, He-Man then decides to infiltrate Castle Grayskull and somehow return to the past so he could prevent Skeletor from conquering Eternia. While he falls for Skeletor's illusions and traps here and there, he grows increasingly desperate as he leads a resistance against Skeletor and eventually emerges victorious. However, this path is not as easy as he is also forced to look within and accept that Eternia's future is rather grim in case he ever loses sight of his responsibilities and allows the world to slip into Skeletor's hands. These last few episodes close out in typical Marvel fashion with a world-changing event, alternative future realities, and a superhero burdened with the knowledge of events that others might never even experience. Another thing that caught my eye was how this comic does not rely too heavily on the power of Grayskull, but rather places more weight on Adam's choices and courage than on any magical artifact. Admittedly, this crossover leans too much into themes of death, devastation, and the burden of heroism for a supposedly children-friendly series. But again, its intensity and in-depth exploration of He-Man's mythos are what eventually made it one of the best He-Man crossovers ever written. He-Man invades the DC Universe, from a Batman showdown to the Injustice War. While He-Man's identity was first revealed in Superman comics, he eventually also came across the other mighty vigilante from the DC Universe, aka Batman. Written by Keith Giffen, a 2013 comic miniseries titled DC Universe vs. the Masters of the Universe ran for 6 issues and relaunched He-Man in the New 52 continuity, where he goes head-to-head with Batman and the Justice League at large. The first issue was cleverly titled Crossing Over, and it began with a glimpse of He-Man's mother, the Queen Marlena, on Earth before revealing that He-Man's crew has been kicked out of Castle Grayskull by Hordak's forces in Eternia. With nowhere to go, the rebel crew had started plotting Hordak's downfall from a distance when they eventually came across Evil Lyn, who might just help them locate Skeletor and tip the scales in their favor. While He-Man plans to scare Hordak away by bringing Skeletor back, the comic once again shifts to Greenwich Village, where Queen Marlene asks for Madame Xanadu's help against Skeletor. As it turns out, this notorious villain had made himself rather comfortable at home, and he had even been plotting to siphon Earth's energy as a means to return to Eternia. As Queen Marlene relays this information to Madame Xanadu and John Constantine, she reveals that magic is a fact of life in Eternia, and how they have got to help her stop Skeletor. But Constantine treats her rather disrespectfully and leaves her with no choice but to reveal her true self. In an entirely different part of Earth, Skeletor works with Black Alice and zeroes in on the Justice League's Dark as potential allies, thereby trying to swap Alice with Constantine. Now, in an entirely different part of the universe, Evil Lyn tries to figure out a way to get Skeletor to ally with them, but she has a hard time locating him. As the comic ends, she ultimately uses He-Man's connection to his mother to transport him and Teela to Earth, but all their plans to ally with Skeletor are pushed to the side as He-Man finds himself facing his mother. As the comic continues, He-Man learns more about his mother's human identity, while she warns them that their plans to approach Skeletor might not work out. In the meantime, Skeletor himself turns the Justice League against He-Man and goes as far as to bring them under his control. When He-Man seeks their help, he is shocked to learn that they view him as the real threat, and things get only worse from here as He-Man accidentally kills Superman while trying to defend himself. He-Man then transforms back into Prince Adam in the hopes of convincing the Justice League that he meant no harm, and while he is preoccupied, Skeletor kickstarts his plans to drain the planet's life force. As the comic progresses, the Justice League finally manages to see that the Masters of the Universe meant no harm, and they all work together to put an end to Skeletor's schemes. Thankfully, they also realize that Superman's death was an elaborate setup orchestrated by Skeletor to ensure that He-Man loses all credibility and that the real Man of Steel is trapped on Trolla. Finally, these two superhero teams join hands to save both Earth and Eternia, but this proves to be a tricky task when they realize that Skeletor has once again unleashed a mind control spell upon the planet. Once again, he convinces them that their villain is He-Man, and by the time we get to the final issue, things unravel so deeply that Orko of Trolla shows up as a greater threat. After dedicating his life to becoming a wizard, this comic paints Orko as a mad god who has lost all his compassion and empathy and has instead begun dreaming of unimaginable power. The final issue reveals Dark Orko as He-Man travels to Trolla to put an end to his madness and even stumbles into the real Superman. After apologizing to him for killing him, the two heroes hash it out and join hands to eliminate Orko, while their teams on Earth locate Skeletor's energy siphon and attempt to destroy it. In the meantime, Batman convinces Black Alice to use her powers to tap into Orko's mind and break the mind control spell he had cast over the world, and the ordeal ends with He-Man assuring Orko that they will help restore him while Superman strikes him down. As his power crumbles into nothingness, Skeletor appears at the scene in a desperate attempt to gain all this power for himself, only for the clash to result in his own destruction. While Constantine quotes Shakespeare and jokes about how all's well that ends well, the Masters of the Universe make their way back to Eternia after Prince Adam bids his mother goodbye. He even promises to ensure that Orko's soul is purged of evil before finally making his way back to Eternia. While they realize that they would have to face Hordak without Skeletor's help, they make their peace with the fact that they would have to find a different way to liberate Eternia. Finally, the comic ends with their departure while Queen Marlena wishes them well and reveals that she would have to stay back as Skeletor's curse makes it impossible for her to return. He-Man even promises to find a way to get rid of the curse while Marlena gives him a locket to remember her by. And as the Masters of the Universe walk away, Teela and He-Man whisper about how Marlena does not know about the daughter she has left behind on Eternia. With them gone, the Justice League of America also calls it a day, as their crossover comes to an end, at least for now. What stood out to me about this miniseries was how well it focused on not just the existing characters and their motivations, but also how it gave us more in terms of He-Man's life history. The comic sheds light on the tragedy of Queen Marlena's curse that keeps her away from home, delves into Orko's darker side, and makes for an interesting reading experience overall, as these two superhero teams set aside their apprehensiveness towards one another to join hands against a common evil. These themes were later picked up in the Injustice vs. Masters of the Universe comics, wherein He-Man allies with Batman to fight against Superman, who had turned into a dictator. Written by Tim Seeley, this comic was released in 2018, and the first issue begins with Prince Adam punishing an imposter, Faker, before realizing that his own kingdom preferred Faker's cruelty over his. While this sends him down a distressing spiral, he soon finds his attention turning towards other matters, as Swamp Thing shows up along with Batman, aka Damian Wayne. The Dark Knight then reveals that while their Earth was once protected by their Kryptonian hero, Superman, things had fallen apart after the Joker drove Superman to accidentally kill his pregnant wife. This act then drove him to eliminate all evil in the world, beginning with the Joker. But unfortunately, this plan only grew more erratic over time. In the current day, Superman had turned into a crazed dictator with collections of enhanced objects that could be used against him. And Batman then reveals that Superman had been keeping an eye on Eternia as well. He then asks Prince Adam for his help in defeating Superman, but their conversation is interrupted by Teela's arrival, who also eventually sees sense. Moreover, the final nail in the coffin comes when we learn that Skeletor is also working with Superman Superman, all while an oblivious Prince Adam travels to Earth to save them from the Man of Steel. We also learn that the original Batman is essentially a mindless slave operating under Superman's power at his headquarters at the Black Oracle, while Damian Wayne had picked up his mantle to seek He-Man's help. If this was not crazy enough, the crossover does a pretty exciting thing where it does not just drag He-Man into Earth's troubles, but also includes storylines where iconic DC villains such as Darkseid head to Eternia. As the comic continues, Superman operates from the Black Oracle alongside Wonder Woman and Skeletor, while Damian Wayne and He-Man come up with a plan to attack the place. Unfortunately, things don't work out as smoothly, and Damian even ends up dying during this plan, while Skeletor and Superman both show up at the scene to confront them. In the meantime, the original Batman wakes up to see his own son being killed off by Wonder Woman, and even breaks free from Superman's control while He-Man prepares to fight Superman. Unfortunately, he does not stand much of a chance as Superman knocks him out and even mocks him as a leader, while the scene shifts to Skeletor, who is shocked to find Zatanna waiting for him in his lab. As he prepares to fight, a glimpse into Eternia reveals that Darkseid and Granny Goodness have stirred up quite some trouble as they break through the castle and reveal the Soul Siphon after neutralizing the sorceress. Unfortunately, He-Man is unaware of the chaos that has been unleashed upon Eternia as he continues to have a heated argument with Superman about how he has seemingly lost his humanity. Naturally, Superman does not take kindly to these comments and attempts to mind control him as soon as he loses his power and reverts to being Prince Adam. With He-Man finally in his control, Superman summons Skeletor to reveal that he has a new subject for him, only to realize that his unexpected ally was no longer around. Well, as it turns out, Skeletor had returned to Eternia to betray Darkseid after leaving him there, and the comic ends on a true shocker as we learn that Skeletor had allied with none other than Shazam to fight Darkseid. While Superman learns all about Skeletor's betrayal, the next issue takes us all the way from Earth to Eternia, as Superman himself shows up to defeat both Darkseid and Skeletor. He not only has Darkseid's Soul Siphon, but also the spirit of the Grayskull and the anti-life equation, and it does not take him much to wipe both Darkseid and Skeletor. With both of these opponents out of the way, Superman then reveals that he is going to fix everything, and the final issue involves him asking He-Man for help in fixing it all, saving countless lives, and eventually saving Clark Kent. As they explore an alternate reality, Superman wishes to see all the different outcomes of what could have happened if Lois Lane had survived Joker's schemes. But every single one of these realities ends in an uncontrolled death. With no other way out, Superman shifts focus to his fight with He-Man, who now learns that Shazam had picked him as his new champion in this alternate reality. Now, as the new Shazam, He-Man uses his energy orb to overpower Superman, who finally embraces the fact that his reign of terror had come to an end. And as he disintegrates, he even expresses that there's a chance he and He-Man could have been friends in another universe. With the threat of an evil Superman subdued and Darkseid's forces defeated, the comic's epilogue reveals that both these worlds are at peace and have even been working together to ensure enhanced safety. The Justice League had gone back to business as usual as they tried to spread the message of what the Superman symbol initially represented, while He-Man continued to live a peaceful life as Prince Adam. He only assumed his secret superhero persona to save civilization, and it almost seems like all these characters had written off the Injustice universe as a bad dream they had woken up from. He-Man x Thundercats, but in a completely separate universe. Moving away from the mainstream DC universe, He-Man also had a crossover with the iconic Thundercats in a crossover arc that ran for 6 issues from 2016 to 2017. This comic was written by Rob David and Lloyd Goldfine and assumes readers are familiar with these universes, as it does not lay out any origin story. Instead, it dives right into action on Third Earth, where Mum-Ra recovers from a battle with Lion-O and seeks the support of his sarcophagus at the Black Pyramid to bounce back. He also seems enraged at Lion-O and the Thundercats in general, and as he shares his revenge plan with the ancient spirits of evil, he realizes that they have also given up on him. Keeping his constant failures in mind, the ancient spirits tell him that he must change something and even guide him towards the sort of power that might finally help him put up a good fight. As he undergoes a transformation from his decayed form to an ever-living, hooded, demonic being, he wonders where he might find the sort of great power as the scene shifts to Eternia. As Prince Adam wakes up up from his slumber, he realizes that he has overslept on a rather important day as he rushes to the royal palace's throne room. His father, King Randor, does not take kindly to his lack of punctuality, and quick glances across the room show that the courtiers, the heroic warriors, and the citizens of Eternos are also rather displeased with him. They call his behavior irresponsible and unbecoming for a prince, and King Randor also reprimands him in private later on. We learn that the day held great significance. Prince Adam was to receive the Harness of Honor, a family tradition symbolizing their willingness to defend the realm. While King Randor declares that Adam might just not be ready to defend Eternia yet, the prince tries to make a case for himself as the skies turn dark. In no time, the planet is cloaked in darkness, and they learn that a rift has been created between Eternia and Third Earth, where the Thundercats scramble to assess the situation. In the background, these events are revealed to be orchestrated by none other than Skeletor, who had secretly struck a deal with the ancient spirits of evil to return the Sword of Power and Mum-Ra to them in exchange for higher freedom and power. However, this is no easy task, especially as the sorceress figures out the problem and warns Prince Adam against using his sword. She explains that the evil forces created in this rift in a desperate attempt to hunt down his sword, and that she should take it away to protect it. However, as soon as Prince Adam hands her the sword, she reveals her true identity as Mum-Ra and even delivers a fatal blow. Thankfully, Adam ends up recovering from the attack while Mum-Ra escapes, but his dreams of attaining higher power are rather short-lived as Skeletor arrives at the scene and takes the sword for himself. The comic issue ends with him declaring that he has just become the master of the universe, and the next issue begins with him making a potion out of Mum-Ra's remains, as he reveals that he had used the golden discs of knowledge to free these ancient spirits of evil. Now, this potion helps him gain the power ever living and turn into an invulnerable entity, while on the other hand, King Randor learns the truth about He-Man and Prince Adam being the same persona. Unfortunately, this happens as Prince Adam takes his last breaths, while in a whole different part of the world, the Thundercats make their way to Snake Mountain and face Skeletor. However, his newfound capabilities help him defend himself, and things go his way until Mum-Ra's spirit eventually reawakens within Skeletor. Soon enough, these two characters clash with one another, while Lion-O reclaims the Sword of Power and leaves the Thundercats to return the sword to Prince Adam. Unfortunately, they arrive to the castle to learn that Prince Adam has passed away, while back at Snake Mountain, Mum-Ra and Skeletor form an unlikely, unwilling alliance after losing everything. The next issue follows Mum-Ra as he comes up with a way to enslave the ancient spirits and unleash them on Palace Eternia, while Lion-O steps in to bring Adam back to life. He accomplishes this by placing him alongside the Sword of Power into Mum-Ra's regenerative sarcophagus back at the Black Pyramid, and he pretty much saves the day by also turning Cringer into Battle Cat and sending him to defend the place while the regeneration takes place. Eventually, all his efforts pay off as He-Man returns to life, but alas, the prince had turned insane during this ordeal, and he even ends up lashing out at his own savior. As Lion-O fights back in defense, he realizes that the best way to help He-Man regain sanity would be by giving him Beyond Sight, a capability that allows him to peek into the future. Through the Beyond Sight, He-Man witnesses the death and destruction that is destined to befall both Eternia and Third Earth, and this is what snaps him back to his usual self. The protagonists finally greet each other and rush to Eternia, where the ancient spirits had wreaked a whole lot of havoc before Man-at-Arms, Panthro, Tigra, Jaga, and other allies had figured out a way to subdue them. When the two heroes return, they find that Skeletor and Mum-Ra have been merged into the Mumator, while the ancient spirits had all died, and the final issue then follows their face-off. To make matters worse, Mumator had located the nexus of all realities, aka the power of Grayskull, that allows him to transport himself across realities. As Lion-O and He-Man chase after the Mumator across alternate realities, they witness many versions of their own lives, as He-Man is Superman in one of them, while Eternia is under the Mumator's rule in another, and so on. They continue to fight for the orb that commands these realities, and during this struggle, they even end up on Thundera, where Lion-O witnesses his own father's sacrifice to ensure the Thundercats escape. While he relives this experience, Mum-Ra returns them to Grayskull, where a final battle culminates among the forces of Eternia and Third Earth. You can almost imagine this scene to be the Avengers Endgame of this crossover, only thankfully nobody has to sacrifice themselves to defeat the bad guy. By the end, He-Man gets his sword back and combines it with the Sword of Omens to destroy Mumator, capture the villains, and eventually even swap some of their own technologies before these two superhero groups part ways. While both these planets are saved, this crossover does leave us with the knowledge of how this victory came at a huge emotional cost to Lion-O, as he had to relive his own father's sacrifice and Thundera's explosion. Perhaps this is what makes this crossover a worthy read, as it takes a rather simple team-up into a shockingly intense, high-stakes mythical clash. From artifacts such as loses the Sword of Power and Sword of Omen to not just one but three mythological opponents in the form of the ancient beings, Mum-Ra and Skeletor. This Thundercats crossover went down in not just He-Man history, but also in DC Comics. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cross into Eternia in a fully canon Dark Horse run. Shifting away from Marvel and DC, you'd be surprised to know that the Masters of the Universe have even collaborated with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in a 6-comic run. Released in 2024, this comic was written by Tim Seeley and was published by Dark Horse Comics and IDW Publishing, making the crossover as official as it gets. The story was named The Turtles of Grayskull, and it was a rather humorous spin on typical crossovers, with the first issue being titled By the Power of the Pizza. It begins with Eternia's paradimensional alarms going off, and soon enough, things go awry as He-Man leaves to investigate but soon goes missing. When Teela expresses her concerns about this, Man-at-Arms and Roboto accompany her to the swamp, where they end up fighting the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and immediately take a defensive stance. However, Michelangelo introduces the Turtles and even declares that they are at their service, while they face a threat in the form of Mousejaw and his hordes of Mousers. As Donatello realizes that they might just not be on Earth anymore, it was Leonardo and Raphael who first jump into action to neutralize the threat of the Mousers and gain the Eternians' trust. In the aftermath of the fight, Leonardo jokes about how he could go for pizza, which is what inspired the issue's title. While the Eternians are confused about pizza, the Turtles reveal that they hailed from New York City, as Michelangelo wondered if they had landed on a backwards world. However, the comic soon takes a turn as Krang and Shredder follow the Turtles into Eternia in the hopes of finding the power of Grayskull and using it to defeat the Turtles. In typical Masters of the Universe fashion, Skeletor jumps at the opportunity to ally with Krang and Shredder to defeat the Turtles, and even congratulates Krang for creating a mutagen so powerful that it can turn anyone into a monstrosity. While the Turtles accompany Duncan and Teela and even learn more about Eternia, the comic ends on a shocking reveal as Skeletor questions the potency of Krang's mutagen, only for the latter to reveal his test subject, P-Hour. Now, this subject turns out to be none other than He-Man, who had undergone an unimaginable transformation and mutated into a mindless purple monster. As the comic continues, Teela and the others get wind of He-Man's capture and rush to his rescue with some help from the Turtles, but soon realize that the mutants cannot be subdued with their weapons. With no other way out, Teela proposes that they can seek higher power at Castle Grayskull, where the sorceress guides them to the Dwell of Souls, where a turn of events leads the Turtles through an adventure of a lifetime. As they make their way to Forgotten Island to retrieve the Power Sword, they even face Skeletor in all his glory, as he orders an enslaved man to get to the sword. Fortunately, this ends with the Turtles vanishing with He-Man and soon reappearing in the Dwell of Souls, where Splinter uses the Power Sword to awaken both Leonardo and He-Man. Now, the last issue begins with a confused He-Man trying to figure out the Turtles' identity, as he had been missing the entire time that Teela and the others had gotten acquainted with the Turtles. Now that he finally knows their true nature, He-Man activates the sword's power and allies with them to defeat Skeletor as well as Krang and Shredder. To do this, he also works alongside the Turtles to follow the sorceress's advice and get their hands on the Shrouds of shape-shifting artifact that can trick their opponents and help them disguise themselves in the face of danger. With Skeletor marching closer with Krang's mutant army, the last issue takes the form of a full-fledged battle between forces of evil and good, which eventually ends with all mutated beings reverting to their original form, while the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles whimsically wish to return home to their beloved pizza. This crossover was definitely far sillier than the others, and while it overflows with the Turtles' fun-loving, innocent personalities, it also shows a fierce side to them, as they stick by the Masters of the Universe and prove to be invaluable help. And with that, I believe I have covered some of the wildest He-Man crossovers, ranging from his alliance with Batman and Superman to his entirely separate story arc with the Thundercats and even the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Out of them all, I was mostly shocked by his secret long-standing Marvel Comics appearance. But well, enough about what I think. I could just go on and on about how much I enjoy a good old collaboration between two strikingly different fictional worlds. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these storylines, and if you have any other He-Man crossover stories, be it canon, semi-canon, or straight-up fan theories, I'm eager to hear your recommendations in the comments below.